My presentation will focus on the causes and treatment of nosebleed for those of us working in the health service. About 60% of people get nosebleeds at some time in their life, particularly children and old people. Most of these events resolve spontaneously, and the mortality rate from nosebleeds is extremely low, but treating them still costs the health service a lot of money in my own hospital. Ideally, we treat many of these as outpatients. Yet the majority of those patients will stay in for 5 days. Last year in my department, $250,000 you've been to the management of this condition. Clearly any saving on that, if duplicated in hospitals across the country, would have a positive impact on resources for other services. As the biggest enemy of the nosebleed is artificial air at hospitals, we get an awful lot of older people coming in with nosebleeds in winter months. As you'll know, such patients don't tolerate the cold for them, so they tend to sit beside radiators and heaters, and these dry up the air. This means the cilia which protects the lining of the nose is dried out, and this in turn exposes the blood vessels which causes bleeding. Our noses haven't developed a defense mechanism against artificial air. 300 years ago, everybody lived in drafty houses and cold environments. Now we all sit in here. It wasn't the nose hasn't adapted to this. The evolution of an organ can take millions of years. In fact, the immediate cause of a nosebleed can be local trauma or inflammation caused by a simple call, but systemic diseases have to be ruled out. In all adults presenting with the condition, people with chronic allergies in the nose are more prone to nosebleeds, and there are some conditions that can present in this way, including cases with the kidney or the liver is no longer functioning as it should. Foreign bodies that enter the nose by some means can trigger nosebleeds, though these are more common in children than usually. Third, be a felt discharge associated with the foreign body, but for a lot of the nosebleeds we see, about 30%, we can't find a specific cause. A lot of people who are at the age where they get high blood pressure are prone to nosebleeds, but the blood pressure itself doesn't cause them. So when we see an adult with a nosebleed, we have to consider the systemic cause, not just look at the event itself. Now, there's a pathway of care associated with nosebleeds. First of all, it's advisable to check on the patients in shock. A loss of at least 500 ml of blood is needed to get the early signs of shock, and it's rare to lose that amount during a common nosebleed. But if you ask any of my colleagues and what they most hated, yelling. This is because they tend to come in late at night. The patient's often scared, and that set their blood pressure off, making any further diagnosis and treatment problematic. So before you can do anything, you have to allay their fears. You might even give them a sedative to try to relax them. You also need to check the not on any medication, like aspirin or warfarin, that might affect blood clotting. The next step is to try to find the precise source of the movie. The simplest way to stop it is to apply a silver nitrate take to that point. It's fairly atraumatic, but you can't get those chemical sticks to the back part of the nose, so they're mainly useful for children who tend to have fewer bleeds from that area than older people. Unfortunately, what often happens when an older patient goes into an emergency department and there may be no ENT service available, as many such departments don't have them. What often happens is that because there is so much blood pouring out, located in this case, a gauze pack will be put into the nose, both in front and behind the nose, to try to put pressure on the whole area and stop the bleeding that way. This could be very traumatic for the patient. And there's also a danger of secondary infection if it's left in too long. So the ideal management is to identify the bleeding point and stop the bleeding directly by cauterizing it, or by ligation of the vessel. At this primary treatment will work 94% of cases. Next, I want to discuss the quite urgent topic of burnout among medical professionals, as it's kind of an epidemic, but I really think that we're not talking about this enough. That's why we are here today, to get a bit of information out there, and start a conversation. So what is it? Well, burnout is a psychological and behavioral syndrome. Emotional exhaustion is one quite common hallmark of burnout. It's been defined as long-term unresolvable job stress, a sense of being overwhelmed and depersonalized, and lacking a sense of personal accomplishment. A recent study from the Mayo Clinic showed that in 2011, a set of doctors reported that they felt burned out, and that number has now risen to 54.4% in 2014. More than half of all doctors in this country are saying, "I really feel that some aspect of my work as a doctor is making me feel burned out." This is really trouble. It's trouble, because a doctor who feels this way can commit more errors. They suffer from compassion fatigue, or just not being able to empathize with others, because they have their own emotional issues. They may retire early, therefore reducing the workforce. They may have problems managing their own lives. 400 doctors committed suicide last year, which is double the rate of the population average. This trouble for patients, in having a workforce that's burned out. This trouble for doctors in terms of their own health and well-being. When I talk about it much, we like to think that doctors can handle everything, but it's clearly not true. It's a problem and there ought to be some solutions. One type of fix is to make sure that hospitals and other healthcare environment try to create better conditions for happier workforce, and for happy adopters. This might include yoga and mindfulness training, having more therapists to talk to, encouraging people to come forward when they feel this way, peer groups and venom mentoring, a lot of tactics that we could pursue and try to engage in. I'm not sure what's best, and maybe one size does not feel, but it's time to really build a safety net so that we can keep our workforce functioning, and we keep physicians at their careers and doing a good job, not making mistakes, not being indifferent to patients, and not harming themselves. This really is a problem and we've got to attend to it in the workplace. It's just as important as any other aspect of workforce safety. When we instituted new software, or when we had new bureaucratic regulations, I think somebody ought to ask, what does this do to the workforce? If one more doctor complains to me about Epic and other types of electronic record keeping and Lilly forms, will be a white doctor. Too many. It takes a lot of energy, makes a lot of people unhappy. A lot of the software and computer assistance that's out there, does it seem to help the doctor? It makes more work, or makes them feel frustrated. It also seems to me that, if you look at what's going on with respect to regulations and administrative or bureaucratic requirements, nobody is saying, hey, is this user-friendly? Which the burden that is putting on the doctor. It's just done to save money, or allow people to collect bills or reliably, but it's not asking what it's taking out of our workforce. I believe that morally we've got to make sure that a highly trained workforce that takes a very long time to get the ability to practice medicine is a resource that we preserve and really take seriously. Yes, I don't think we are doing that as part of employee or workplace safety. I think it's crucial, but it's being ignored. We also have to view it as part of patient safety. And I think we should start spending some resources to figure out how we can make the physician workplace more user-friendly. How can we make it a happier place to be? What can we do to institute regulations, guideline software and bureaucracy, to try it out on the workforce for a while, to make sure that they are satisfied and